Hi everyone, welcome back to Ukrainian Media Podcast. I'm Olena Solodovnikova, and today I'm excited to be joined by the journalist Vudi Xhymshiti, who is based in London and specialized in exposing the Balkans, especially Russian and Serbian disinformation campaigns in Eastern Europe. Hello, Vudi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Let's proceed to the topics. To kick off things off, I'd like to talk about the visit to Kyiv, President of Serbia Vučić. And it's not secret that Serbia provides an openly pro-Russian policy, and there are Russian instigators in their state leadership.
My understanding is that knowing Serbia, knowing Vučić and his political character, first of all, to begin with, we should clarify for the audience that Vučić is a former propaganda minister of Slobodan Milosevic, the man that is in charge for the death of at least 250,000 people on a one-decade period of time all across the Balkans, in Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo. Their muzzle of gun firing at people, knifing and raping men, women, and children was halted following NATO's intervention in 1999 that aimed at stopping their genocidal campaign, which led to the dissolution of Yugoslavia, and then later the declaration of independence from Kosovo in 2008. President Vučić has been his right-wing man in charge with justifying crimes and war crimes against humanity and genocidal campaign of Milosevic. And he assumed power soon enough after pro-European parties in Serbia overthrew Milosevic's regime. The party that he belonged to is also Slobodan Milosevic, and Mr. Vučić regained access to the power in Belgrade, continuing with an idea to continue the realization of what they aimed at for decades, the Greater Serbia. The plan of the Greater Serbia is basically to cleanse off most of the territories of former Yugoslavia from non-Serbs, and eventually securing an access to the Adriatic Sea, to which the idea was that Russian Navy fleet would be homed, and further continuing their hegemonical expansion forward with their interest of influencing European market, European politics, and so on and so forth. Now, just 9 months following the full-scale invasion launch of Kremlin in Ukraine, Serbia decided to sign a foreign policy alignment treaty with Moscow in New York in September 2022. 1 year later than that, in 2023 September, Serbia attempted to annex northern Kosovo in the same tactic that Kremlin annexed Crimea of Ukraine. Serbia supplies and support everything what's Russian. It is a destabilizing source in the Balkans. It attempts to destabilize Croatia. It attempts to destabilize Montenegro and possibly install their puppet control of the politics there. It attempts to destabilize and even secess Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it continuously, relentlessly is involved in trying to destabilize Kosovo, launching all their psychological warfare operation with the hand of the Kremlin. It houses Kremlin special operation tactic of Russia's secret service in Niš, which is believed to be an espionage center. They call it a humanitarian Russian center, which actually has nothing to do with humanitarian. They're also hosting Wagner recruitment center. They call it a Wagner Cultural Center in Belgrade. And Serbia is the only Western Balkans country that is not has not imposed sanctions on Russia, following multiple demands from the Western democracies and European Union. Serbia is the only country in the Western Europe that applies the political and military tactics, same as the Kremlin. And it challenges the political discourse and narrative of the Western democracies. And the reason why he's today in Ukraine is basically with his old school narrative that we have heard of multiple times, saying that Serbia supports Ukraine because it supports territorial integrity of sovereign nations. What does he mean with this? The interpretation of Serbia that Kosovo became independent is it became independent unfairly so because NATO intervened to occupy a territory that, according to them, belonged to Serbia before it even became Yugoslavia. They blame NATO for the intervention, but they never talk the reasons why NATO intervened. The reason why NATO intervened against Serbian forces of Yugoslavia was because, as I said before, they were committed. They were committed and conducting genocidal campaign, starting with Croatia, where they failed, continuing with Bosnia, where they committed an already internationally recognized genocide in Srebrenica, where also they failed to cleanse off Bosnia and Herzegovina from the non-Serbs as Milosevic wanted. And then they continued the crackdown in Kosovo with the same goal, aiming to cleanse Kosovo of the non-Serbs, which in this case, the main target of Serbian armed forces of Yugoslavia were the ethnic Albanians that were living there. So this is the same guy with the same political goal that is basically only taking advantage of Ukraine to justify their narrative, what they say, that Kosovo was unfairly taken from Serbia. Therefore, Serbia's territorial integrity, with its integral part being Kosovo in the Serbian constitution, as they put it, should be recognized equally as the Western world is recognizing Ukrainian territories that are occupied by Russia. In the meantime, they serve as they serve as a house of station to support Russian business operations when they were sanctioned by the West. Russian businessmen would come and land in Belgrade and be given Serbian citizenship, transport all their business operation to Belgrade, and then expand in European markets. So Serbia is the trampoline in service of Putin's war machine. I do understand the politics is not gray, but I would have to say that I am disappointed to see Ukraine often turning a blind eye towards these matters of the fact. It's very disappointing to see that Ukraine has actually opened doors for a state visit by President Vučić, considering that he's a host even of Russia Today and Pravda. The right wing, Kremlin's, Putin's spokespeople that try to convince the whole nations of the Balkans with their propaganda that Kremlin responded to a provoked political operation of NATO by trying to get Ukraine in becoming member of NATO or Ukraine becoming an EU. Therefore, Kremlin's operation of response, according to them, was totally justified. This kind of narrative and pack of lies gladly do not find home in Kosovo, among the population. Unfortunately, in a well masked operation, there are a certain number of media entities in the Republic of Kosovo that has been deliberately, by choice, consistently undermining the institutions of Kosovo, undermining the trust in the institutions of Kosovo, trying to minimize Serbia's role, Belgrade's direct role on destabilizing Kosovo, meanwhile trying to delegitimize the rightful right of the Republic of Kosovo to defend itself from Serbia's aggression. You for sure are familiar. This is what has been happening also in Ukraine with people who are pro-Kremlin voices. This is what we've seen all over Europe with people who are pro-Kremlin voices. They're trying basically they're trying to blame the victim only for its own existence and for its own rightful right to breathe and live, as a matter of provocation for the actual aggressor that is aiming to have an operation that aims at their geopolitical expansion. So that's the situation what we have.
But why Ukraine need to open the door for Vučić now? What is our advantages for that? What do you think?
I'm afraid there is no advantage whatsoever. However, having a state siding with you, at least by the statement, although not by the act, would be a reasonable justification. There is also reports that Serbia also sell weapons to Ukraine.
Yeah,
we don't know. There is no evidence of this matter as to how much weapons is Serbia supplying to Ukraine. But even if that is the case, that Serbia is supplying weapons to Ukraine, my question is, how come you're seeing an injured creature. In one hand, you're offering water to try to reclaim and replenish their possibility to live. On the other hand, you are ripping them off bit by bit with a knife on their skin. And this is what Serbia is doing with regards to Ukraine. Serbia is probably supplying Ukraine with some weapons. However, Serbia is the political entity and the actual state that has a foreign policy alignment treaty with Moscow and is working relentlessly to destabilize democracies in Europe. Those very democracies that are actually in favor, fully, wholly, by soul, mind, and actual action in the side with Ukraine. And that's what's happening, you know? That's the actual scenario where Vučić is supplying some weapons to Ukraine, giving some water. On the other hand, and legs and whatever it has in its own power, ripping off, empowering the very power that is actually threatening the very existence of Ukraine, and that is Russia.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But at the same time, protests have been outgoing in the center of Belgrade for several months. As Serbian President Vučić and his Progressive Party are attempting to portray the protesters as a color revolution organized from abroad. However, the protests are actually being driven by students, and that reminds me the revolution of dignity in Ukraine. What are the real reasons for this protest? Are people dissatisfied with corruption and economic collapse in domestic politics?
Well, you know, students are protesting relentlessly over the last few months, and there is corruption way beyond one can imagine. Vučić himself is aligned with all sorts of criminal groups and criminal gangs that have installed in the state-run apparatus. And yes, the fact that he paints these protests as colorful revolution, he wants to talk about Ukraine. He wants to talk about the case of Euromaidan. He is basically trying to defend himself with Kremlin talking points. And that's the man that is actually being hosted today in Ukraine. Who otherwise would not have ever supported Euromaidan, the revolution of Ukrainian people to defend itself for its own existence, to run a state and lead a state towards integrity and prosperous values of democracy, and separate from influence and possible control of the Kremlin.
Yeah, but basically, the ordinary people in Serbia, do you think they are supported pro-Russian policy or not? Or they are indifferent in that?
Unfortunately, there's been surveys where 70% of the population in Serbia is not in favor of democracy. Is not in favor of democracy as in, you know, aligning with the European Union bloc. More than 70% of the people favor the idea to continue to align with the Kremlin.
Gosh.
And it's a very tiny, small percentage of people that is actually willing to look forward to a potential European perspective. Vučić does symbolic gestures to continue to fool the people in Brussels that, in my view, has been completely spineless with their foreign policy approach towards Kremlin to begin with, starting in 2014. A few days ago, I wrote an editorial where I talk about it, and I say, and I insist on that it is the West that let Ukraine down in 2014, because it was then the time when the West should have shown a spinal cord to actually help Ukraine and push back Russian forces to make sure Putin understands by the muzzle of gun, because this is the only way he seemed to understand, no other ways, that he cannot and will not be tolerated to continue to try to occupy foreign territories that don't belong to Russia, they're not Russian, and won't ever be. They let down Ukraine in 2014. Unfortunately, they let Ukraine down in 2022 upon the launch of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And that kind of European and generally Western tune of letting down Ukraine continued in 2023, continued in 2024, and is now continuing even harsher in 2025 with Donald Trump sitting in the White House, which, according to multiple investigations, including the ones from The Guardian, he's the man that's hired from the Kremlin to get the big house from within. And since day one, Donald Trump set foot in the White House, he has started to dismantle the state of United States of America brick by brick, and he's continuing to do so. Now we have a situation where there is uprising in the United States of America against his administration and his policies. We don't know where is it going to go, but things are going really bad down there also. But I'm afraid with the case of Ukraine so far, in my view, there is no hope the European Union will show a staggering commitment to actually help Ukraine not just survive the war, not just resist the war, but actually fight back and push Russian troops out of Ukrainian territory as they should. One little light in the end of the tunnel appears to be Mr. Merz, the new German chancellor. He seemed to be acting differently from what we are used to see them in the past. But again, actions speak louder than the statements and conferences in 3,000 pounds worth of suits that they come out to show up in front of cameras.
Yes, definitely. I want to back to the Kosovo Republic, and your last take was titled Russian-style psy-ops are targeting Kosovo, and you talking about the style of local television presenters and how they distort information. Please explain in more detail about that cases.
Among a consistent narrative that has been going on in Kosovo, enabling, appeasing, and normalizing pro-Serbia's political aggressive discourse against Kosovo, lately, the very same parrots of Belgrade, who are Albanian by ethnicity, Kosovars by the citizenship, sitting in downtown Pristina, the capital of Kosovo, and having a sip of a cup of tea in the TV programs in front of the screens of millions of ethnic Albanians of Kosovo in Kosovo, they have now started to feel so comfortable, so even started to argue that the genocidal campaign of Slobodan Milosevic regime that was launched, designed, orchestrated, and organized and logistically supplied by Belgrade itself to Kosovo somehow was consequence of Kosovo Albanians' guerrilla warfare resistance against Milosevic regime as a provocation. I quote one of them saying, well, if Kosovo Liberation Army wouldn't have provoked Milosevic, nothing much wouldn't have happened. You know, all the massacres and the war crimes that have been happening in Kosovo are consequence of the provocation of Milosevic, which then he got out of control.
This the victimization became to start to make victim as an aggressor, to make
exactly. So
places.
this is typical Kremlin talking point strategy. Kremlin even now is saying, we are only having a special operation to try to cleanse Ukraine from its Nazism and whatever they are making there up on their delusional alternative world. But we're not on a full scale of war. You know, we're only responding to a provocation. And this is exactly what these people in Kosovo are trying to get the younger generation that did not live through the war or shortly in the aftermath of the war. They're trying to convince them that somehow we were the wrong party to actually fight against this systematic, well-organized and orchestrated repression coming from the regime of Slobodan Milosevic, which led to even people were even beaten in the street just for being Albanians. Not that they were just kicked out from institutions of public governance or public service, not that they were kicked out of the media, not that they were kicked out of the schools. The Serbs removed the right of ethnic Albanians in Kosovo to even be educated in the primary and high school and even the universities. And then when they started to beat people on the street just because they were Albanians, that's when they actually generated a response of people taken to the streets to protest, to demand their rights to be respected. And when the protesters started taking to the streets, the Serbian apparatus, security apparatus of the regime of Milosevic started shooting people. They started going and picking them up from their homes, and torturing them and killing them. That was what they were doing, which then led to people decide to get their arms and the guns in their hands, and all guns blazing, fight against the regime, which then, of course, it was extremely powerful as it was because it had the whole military power of the entire Yugoslavia in its own hand. Then they started their campaign of committing crimes and atrocities such as raping women, raping men, killing children and massacring groups of people, and often forcing many of them to basically flee like refugees in the neighboring countries such as today's North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Albania, and many countries in the West that I think Albanians were forced to flee due to what was going on. So now the narratives of pro-Serbia's discourse, pro-Kremlin discourse in Pristina is happening. And these people are trying to say that we were guilty, that we demanded our rights to be respected. Therefore, we provoked Milosevic, and he had no choice but to deal with us in the way he did. Since I started reporting in Ukraine in 2022, I've been warning about it, I've been writing about it, analyzing all these details, and unfortunately, I'm afraid the government of Kosovo don't seem to be listening. They are afraid because on this narrative propaganda, there's also some of the Western most unscrupulous diplomats that, according to some investigations I led, we found them to have been corrupted by Belgrade. We found Escobar, the U.S. envoy to Pristina Belgrade dialogue, with his narrative, with his pro-Serbian narrative. We found out that his wife was being funded by Serbia's Foreign Affairs Ministry. We found another family member of his who had been involved in a direct contract agreement to lobby for Republika Srpska, Albania and Herzegovina in Washington. And he was basically, this man was a family member of Escobar, was basically contracted with Milorad Dodik, a Kremlin-awarded politician. Putin awarded him personally in Moscow to basically thank him for working in favor of Russia's geopolitical strategies in the Balkans. And then we found an EU diplomat, Miroslav Lajčák, who still had kept ties with McGimo Institute in Moscow, which is an institute of foreign policy studies. And following these findings, gladly, these people were discharged. They were dismissed from their jobs. However, there is still so much mold, the Kremlin mold, in EU and many other Western institutions, that in my perspective, it is no surprise that they are compromised.
Yeah, this is awful. And as a result of the sanctions imposed by EU on Kosovo, 600 million euros of aid of the Republic has been blocked. And the sectors the most affected are energy and environment. And please tell us what was the reason for this?
Well, when you hear of the reason, you want to cry about it. Because you see, I often argued what European Union wanted from Kosovo in exchange of not putting a pack of measures such as sanctions is as if European Union would start Ukraine now to blame, why are you resisting against Putin? Bring back your forces home into the military bases. This is what happened in September 2023, where Serbia orchestrated a Russian-styled annexation of northern Kosovo, like Russia annexed Crimea. They tried to annex northern Kosovo, and because Prime Minister Kurti and President Osmani sent security forces to thwart this operation, which they did successfully so. Following the failure of Serbia to annex northern Kosovo, then Serbia orchestrated multiple civil protests, which basically they were being operated with the control of Belgrade itself. Then European Union diplomats and Western diplomacy in general started bleating about, oh my God, how Kosovo is violating the rights of minorities. You should withdraw back your troops because you should not be there. Nothing serious is happening. You know, situation must be calmed down and de-escalated. They were asking Pristina to de-escalate an escalation that was wholly, thoroughly orchestrated from Belgrade, and Belgrade just continued with the same tune. And of course, there is opposition political parties in Kosovo that were clearly maintaining the same political discourse in favor of Kremlin-aligned aggressive Serbia against the Republic of Kosovo. But they were bringing those narratives with European Union flag and American flag because, oh my God, we should agree with the United States because the United States is the one that helped us get the independence, and we don't want to, and threaten the relationship, diplomatic relationship with the United States. We should do what EU is asking us to do because that is a threat to relations with Kosovo and EU, and therefore, even if that means we should withdraw our forces and let Serbia get away with murder, we should do so. But these
Yes.
people are filthily corrupt. And they have had also, according to multiple reports, joint criminal operations with a leader of the Banjska attack, Mr. Milan Radojcic, who is now being hosted and harbored in Serbia, close to President Vučić.
Yes, it seems to be that EU try to sit in between two fences every time to balance, to do something like for appeasing everyone, but as a result, that is worse and worse. And what about the American aid? I remember that monuments to Bill Clinton and Madeleine Albright in Pristina, the capital of Kosovo, there's like a sign of gratitude for the USA. How does Republic of Kosovo currently depend on American military aid?
Well, we have a great number of US troops based in Kosovo, and there is out of the question that they will ever go. However, it could be doubtful, the out of question statement, because Trump, considering, in my view, being Putin's man in the White House, anything can happen. But we don't know how's that going to be. However, when it comes to European Union sitting in the middle of the both fences, I'm afraid they're not sitting on the middle of the both fences. They are actually sitting in the side of Kremlin-aligned aggressive Serbia in case of Kosovo. They have never condemned Vučić's actions and orchestrated aggression in Kosovo. They always try to put a blame in the actual victim, which is the Republic of Kosovo. Probably, some of them with this very colonial old school mind were surprised to see that the one they gave a helping hand to be independent is now questioning even their own sanity. Because it's insane to ever think that European Union is actually standing by an autocratic fascist regime of Vučić that is, by matter of fact, is aligned with the Kremlin. As I said before, it hosts a Russian regional espionage center in Niš. It hosts Wagner Recruitment Cultural Center in Belgrade. It does not impose Western-imposed sanctions on Russia. It serves as a gatehouse to access European markets for Russian businessmen who are funding the Putin's war machine by accessing European markets. It is a source of destabilizing democracies and states in the Western Balkans. And yet, European Union decides shamelessly to go and put sanctions in Kosovo while rewarding Serbia with billions of euros in funding of the infrastructure, which money, by the way, are, as per reported evidence, going all into the boogeyman private pockets of Vučić's allies.
Yes, I absolutely agree. You suggest that Albania, which is the neighbor of Kosovo Republic, was once a reliable defender of Kosovo, and the country that sought a deeper Euro-Atlantic integration is at risk of becoming an unwitting accomplice to these malicious plans because of the liberal policies of Albanian Prime Minister Rama. What is going on? Is Albania taking Serbia's side? Why and how will the situation unfold?
First of all, Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama has entered its fourth mandate on those elections of May 2025, which many are arguing that they were rigged.
Okay.
Second, he's a man that has opened his gates for all criminal entities, including drug cartels. In all international reporting, credible reports, Albania is identified as a government that has opened the gates for criminal entities and drug cartels to govern the country. And this is what Kremlin finds it easy. These kind of entities that Kremlin finds easy to work with. And this is why I sometimes in some of my articles argue that although to many the official foreign policy of Albania may seem like a good man diplomacy, in fact, I'm afraid the Kremlin might have a hand inside the Albanian government. There might be a Kremlin mole there because, when you know and have relentless evidence on someone being involved in compromising activities such as drugs and all sorts of organized crime entities, you easier can have leverage on them.
Yeah.
And whether that is or that is not, the matter of factual fact, the matter of verifiable fact is that Albania has been standing in favor of Serbia, even when the latter organized and orchestrated an annexation attempt of northern Kosovo, and the same style, Russia annexed Crimea. On the very early morning hours of the continuous attempt of aggression from Serbia and northern Kosovo, Albanian Prime Minister rushed to make a statement in the media and said, well, we should propose an international peace conference between Kosovo and Serbia. We should recognize the new reality on the ground. And Kosovo North is a no man's land, and it has to be addressed. Wait. The annexation attempt has started. There is no picture on the ground whether it will be successful or not. You're proposing a new reality on the ground? What were your expectations, Prime Minister Rama? What did you know about it? A few days before the annexation attempt, the dismissed, disgraceful U.S. envoy to Pristina Belgrade dialogue of Biden administration, Mr. Gabriel Escobar, had stated openly, he went to northern Kosovo, and he stated openly, threatened the Republic of Kosovo, saying if Kosovo would not agree to implement the creation of the Association of Serb Municipalities in Kosovo, there will be serious security consequences. He said that, serious security consequences. In my view and understanding is both Mr. Rama, the Prime Minister of Albania, and Gabriel Escobar were fully aware that an operation of annexation of northern Kosovo was on motion, right? So, but diplomatically, they were trying to warn and prevent what they could argue. Oh, we were just trying to prevent the worst. Really, by going in bad with Kremlin-aligned autocrat Vučić. Seriously, by going in with a state that is prepared to actually aggress another independent foreign state. By going in bad with a politician that is a former propaganda minister of Milosevic that has committed crimes and war crimes against humanity and genocide all across the Balkans. Is that what you're talking about? These people have to be held accountable, and very harshly so. They should not be allowed to get away with murder, because Serbian paramilitaries orchestrated by Belgrade on September 23, 2024, on September 24, 2023, sorry, they killed a Kosovan police officer. And there is so much to be paid to Kosovo, not just for that, but also about the whole crimes and war crimes against humanity and genocide that Serbia committed during the 1999-1998 war in Kosovo. And they should acknowledge and recognize it and start the reparation process and also respect the independent country of Kosovo. And they only can do this by being forced. Unfortunately, historically, Serbian political leadership have never shown signs of civility. have never shown signs of civil discourse. They only understand the muzzle of gun, same as Russia. The muzzle of gun will get the job done for the bullies. Otherwise, they don't understand any other language, I'm afraid. And I wish they did.
Yes, now Ukrainians do understand you and all Kosovo's people and that. And my last question could be about your experience regarding memory politics. Russians are already trying to portray themselves not as aggressors, but as the victims of the war. We understand that this will be intensified over time. Is the similar trend in Kosovo, I think, and how are you dealing with it?
I'm afraid the similar trend has just started. I just wrote a piece that you mentioned earlier, the Russian psy-ops operation in Kosovo.
Yeah.
Already, but because of my writing, I hope, and because of my multiple appearances on live broadcasting and in social media, they have kept quiet. And somehow I don't see them coming forward anymore. I don't know. They may have continued their campaign, but because I don't have the ability to continuously observe them. But Ukrainians should organize, unite, and never ignore these narratives. They should continuously fight, continuously remind the world who actually is the aggressor and what the aggressor wants, and remind the world of the whole historical commitment of the aggressor in the aggressions of all other nations that they've done. Because as we know, Russia didn't do this just with Ukraine; they did with Georgia. They did with they continued with Crimea, and then because they were tolerated and appeased, and somehow they changed the narrative, they did it now in 2022, and they're continuing to do it. And they even tried with Armenia, in the case of the war of Azerbaijan against Armenia in the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. So they will continue. They will succeed if they are not challenged. Believe it or not, every single word they write about it, they will convince people that it is what they are saying it is, if there is nobody else to challenge them. Therefore, the psychological propaganda warfare matters a lot. They spend millions on it. That's why it is important. And we have to understand that we should spend equally our millions to actually challenge that. And what is amazing for the side of us is that we are in the truth side of the story. Yeah, it's easier for us because you don't have to make up stupid stuff that don't exist. They have to make up stuff that don't exist. They have to disorder their mental stability, their mental well-being, in order to be able to deliver lies. Because people lie only because a significant portion of time they are disordered, they are mentally deluded. Therefore, they can easily, with an open face, shamelessly deliver a lie. Therefore, for us, it's easier to deliver the truth because it is there. We just have to get it together and speak about it and write about it relentlessly and never stop.